dug deep. You're Ken Kell. You're the hockey guy. I go, I don't know anything about this guy.
This is The Conversation Line, presented by Fieger Law.
Welcome to another edition of The Conversation Line. I am your host on this day, Ken Daniels, television play-by-play voice of the Detroit Red Wings, and we're going to venture outside hockey. We're going to talk broadcasting. We're going to talk baseball. Pleased to be joined by Dan Dickerson, the great radio play-by-play voice of the Detroit Tigers, and of course, Jason Benetti, the wonderful play-by-play voice of the Detroit Tigers on FanDuel Sports Network. Thank you to you both for being here. We're going to talk baseball and we're going to talk broadcasting. It's winter time. I know that Jason, you work lots elsewhere. Nice to have you in a home today, right? You're not working somewhere.
People have been trying to put me in a home for a long time. I feel like this is, you remember when the Jetsons and Flintstones came together? This is what this feels like. Like, that's the whole deal, is like we're just bringing the two podcasts. Is there going to be like a black hole that opens up because we're coming together?
The Jetsons and Flintstones come together?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they did at one point.
I missed that movie.
I don't know. I think they did until someone yells, Jane, stop this crazy thing. That's what's going to happen. Someone's going to tell us that. We're going to start, though, broadcast, because I want to know about your careers and your start. And for me, even at 8 years old, I'd go to sleep with a little yellow transistor radio underneath my pillow, listening to Foster Hewitt growing up in Toronto. And to me, hockey was my symphony, and it kept me in a place where I could just be me and dream. How was it for you guys, your first taste of broadcast? For me, it wasn't about the score. It was just about listening. Dan?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have, I mean, speaking of listening on the radio, I mean, we all had transistor radios, or at least those of a certain age. I remember, that clock radio that's on Groundhog Day? I had that clock radio by my bed. My room was in the basement. And while that sounds cruel, I loved being in the basement. So I got my clock radio next to me, listening to the West Coast games. This is my most vivid memory. I mean, I listened to a lot of games, but listening to games on the West Coast, and I would literally go to bed with the clock radio on, and said it would go off after a certain time. But I do remember vividly listening and watching the end of that '67 season when they went down to the final day of on a little black and white TV, and then getting the Year of the Tiger record in '68, which we wore those grooves out. And but it absolutely captivated me. And remember, there weren't, as weren't many TV games on when we were growing up. I think the most they would do would be 30 to 40 in a season. So radio was where you got your Tigers news and got your Tigers fix. And Ernie Harwell just absolutely sucked me in, with Paul Carey. Should always be mentioned, because Paul was right there with him for 19 years, and his voice was every bit as part of summer as Ernie's.
Jason, and for me, it was hockey. It was Foster Hewitt, and I tell people I literally dreamed my job, because a West Coast game after '67, when there was expansion and the Maple Leafs would be playing on the West Coast, I would fall asleep listening to the game. I literally dreamed my job. Jason, you?
Real quick, Bruce Martin was also a big part of my youth. I remember one time we were flying to, this is another vivid memory, but this is what radio does, right? It just puts these memories in your brain. We were flying as a family I think we were flying to Washington, D.C. I can't remember why. Anyway, bad weather, winter, and we're stuck on the ground. So the pilots invited the kids up to the cockpit, and they put a Red Wings playoff game on. This would have been late '60s. And again, those are the kinds of things that radio does for childhood memories.
Yeah, I grew up in the age of more games were on. But I will say, one of the things that excited me most was I used to convince my parents to let me leave school early on the Thursday and Friday of the NCAA basketball tournament, because at some point they were ill of me feigning illness. Like sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, I'd be like, And it would happen at approximately 7:45 p.m. on the Wednesday before the tournament started. So
They
they
were
just,
beginning to notice a pattern.
yeah, right, exactly. They were like, I don't think that's real this time. But they would be like, you know what? Just come home at 12:30, whatever. My parents were not delinquent parents. Please don't worry about that. But I'd come home and we'd be in the car and Westwood One would be flipping around from site to site for the NCAA
The
tournament.
best.
Yeah, the thrill of every basket mattering so much and so deeply. But where the television age really helped me, I think, love play-by-play is when DirecTV first came out and you'd have NFL Sunday Ticket, you could hear all the announcers side by side, one channel, this announcer, one channel, this announcer. And then
Mm.
suddenly it's like, wow, there is a difference. There's a differentiation. And then MLB Extra Innings comes out, and I'm watching like the Orioles on Home Team Sports or whatever it was. And you just hear all these different voices. And as a kid who didn't play sports, it appealed to me to be somebody affiliated with it, plus the excitement of it. And this is a really weird postscript to this, but I grew up loving, this is not going to surprise either of you, loving game shows.
Yeah,
I
me
loved
too.
game shows so much and the cadence of it. And I do think part of what drew me to play by play is the build to a big moment,
Mm.
like they did on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, like they did on $25,000 Pyramid. The drama of that is a little bit like what we do as announcers. So those two combination sort of platter together really made it for me. And it's very clear, I think, from this portion of the conversation that I was just an awesome prom date.
Yeah, and I was watching Chuck Woolery. We'll be back in 2 and 2.
Two and two.
And two. Be back in 2 and 2. You could find that. That's what I love connection. But game shows too, the same thing. And as you just said, your parents were supportive, so were mine. I'd be reading a newspaper in the bathroom out loud, and my mother would walk past and go, "Oh, Ken's working to be a sportscaster again."
Would she
Dan,
really?
yeah,
That's
Oh,
awesome.
yeah, oh yeah. And it was an older. I was still living, I was 18, 19 in college. Dan, were your parents like that?
Yeah, very supportive. I always think of this because it's kind of where it started. I mean, truly getting Stratomatic cards, the game with dice and cards of real players from my Aunt Barb, sent it to me I think it was the year after the Tigers won the World Series in '68. So now I've got the Tiger cards. So good year to send it. So I just started getting hooked on Stratomatic, but right away I started announcing the games, much to the irritation of my brother is just like, can you stop? Especially if I was winning,
Oh yeah.
that's but that's no question where it started. And I would like play a little mini season, and then I'd put a note up on the basement wall. Hey, game 7 of the World Series coming up. Feel free to come down and join. No one ever did, but there's no question that's where it started. And then just in terms of fostering my love for it, my parents were big sports fans. Dad was kind of a big football fan, but that's about it. Mom wasn't a sports fan, but they took me to games. And I'll never forget when, Monday night at Tiger Stadium, head of the family got in for $5 and everybody else, I don't know, I want to say 50 cents. And I think it was. You had to sit in the center field bleachers. Mom took me and my brother down one night with a couple of buddies, 50,000 people, Monday Night Baseball. It happened to be against the Yankees. And I just always remember that. They kept making announcements. Will you please move to the center of the aisle? Everybody squish to the center of the aisle. He just kept packing in. Mom had a smile on her face. She loved it. But that's the kind of thing that just, got me hooked.
I found I had to maybe entertain myself. My siblings were older, 13, 11, and 7, older than I was. So obviously, they're in their teens and I'm a young kid. They didn't want to babysit, wanted nothing to do with me. So I'd wind up, playing goal. And for me, it was hockey. And for you guys, baseball or football or what it was. But for me, it was truly hockey. And I'd be in the basement. Even when I played tabletop hockey, we used to not count ins and outs. Like the puck went in, came out really quickly. So my brother, who was maybe I was 7, he was 14, I used to put scotch tape across the net, so he couldn't tell, and the puck would come in and out and go in and out. When he found out, he beat the crap out of me. But anyway, when he found out I was cheating, however, I would entertain myself, and I think that became, and I do play-by-play in my head for myself. I don't know about you, Jason. Was that the same for you, that you really just found you were entertaining yourself?
Absolutely. I still am.
With you.
I so can I speak to Dan very briefly for
Sure, go
1 second
ahead.
before I
It's a
answer your question?
conversation line, and you guys have your own podcast. You go ahead.
No, just an aside to Dan. We have yet another person on one of these podcasts talking about how they were inspired by an older brother beating the crap out of them. It was a total theme of the entire
Was
first
it?
season of Have a Seat.
Every time. Every time.
It's unbelievable. So here we are again. He's even asking the questions and he brought it up.
No,
We're like a magnet for
We
sibling
are a
rivalry.
magnet for the story.
Yes,
funny.
it's
And my
really
brother-
funny.
And my brother's name was Gary, and you don't meet many Garys anymore, do you? That's from way
No.
back. You don't. There are no Garys anymore.
Garys are tough though.
It's
Garys, Garys are
much
tough.
underreported topic.
Yeah, where have all the Garys
Where have all
gone?
the Garys gone? Jason, you have to tell the band story. You have to tell the band.
Oh, yeah. So like
Because it ties
as I'm
in. Ties
as
in.
I'm narrating games in my head or aloud, just like you guys, right? Like you're reading the paper in the bathroom and Dan's doing play-by-play of Stratomatic. I've got Ken Griffey Jr. baseball for Nintendo, and I have friends over and I'm narrating that. I would even like narrate the James Bond game GoldenEye, and doing play-by-play of somebody being like torched by a proximity mine isn't exactly the most compelling theater, but I did it because I was entertained. So anyway, you know, um, so I was in band and I played the tuba, and the tuba is heavy and I am not. And so the band director thought it would be a good idea to put the tuba on a stand, and I would march at halftime and I'd march in place with the tuba on a stand. Somebody run out the stand with the tuba, like a stagehand comes running out from backstage. And so I'm marching in place while the band is spelling letters that I can be the base of, right? Like I'm the bottom of the F or the bottom of the H, or just like, they're all moving and I'm just
You
there.
provided a very important role. You were their mark.
I was, I was.
Go stand by
I
Jason.
I know how important I was as the backbone of all of this. But yeah, the band director was like, "That's weird," and so he decided to let me go announce the sets for the band, and that's how I got in front of a microphone for the first time.
No
Therefore,
way.
ruining the lives of so many audience members over the course of a couple of decades.
See how the unexpected happens. It's amazing. It's
One of the-
amazing. But you
Yeah, one
have
of the highlights.
confidence you could do it, though. Did you?
Yeah.
What were you gonna say, Dan? Real before I?
Well, I was just going to say one of the highlights of for me, I was covering Michigan football sideline reporter. And the only way I could go cover the Rose Bowl one year, they basically said, okay, you can go. But I was a kind of a new sports hybrid at the time at WWJ. You can go, but you've got to report on the parade. So, so I would go to the parade practice, file my news reports about how the Michigan band was getting ready for the parade. And then the day of the parade in Pasadena, I had to stake out different spots along the route where there were payphones, so I could get to a payphone to phone in and then the play-by-play, I really wish I had, because I think it was really good. Really good. Oh, look at that float. Beautiful flowers. The the arm is going up and down. I mean, just
Who led the Tournament of Roses that year? They've had some really cool luminaries, like Bob Hope did it, I think, like Betty White. Do you
Carol
remember?
Burnett did the coin toss, so I'm guessing she probably headed the parade. Yeah.
Awesome.
I do. I was on the political beat before. It's versatility, and we can talk about that too, and staying in your lane. But for me, that was hockey was more my lane. But I started in the political beat, and it was Premier John Robarts in Canada had passed away, and one of my first assignments was going to cover his funeral. So as part of that, I wasn't sure what I was doing, as nervous as I could be, and I was doing overnight news in Toronto. But then I'm going out to cover this funeral, and I sat
Night
down.
news in Toronto.
Oh, I was doing overnight news in Toronto, and they sent me out during the day to John Robarts' funeral, and I said they brought down the casket draped in the Canadian flag at about 10:47 a.m. and my sent it in, and my news director said, "You'll have to redo this." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because it's not a friggin' horse race about 10:47 a.m. Just say they brought down the casket. Like, I'm giving the time about 10:47 a.m. It's not a friggin' horse race." So you learn little things as you go, so to that point, and versatility in this business, and people say be as versatile as you can be. So even when I was doing the political beat, they knew I could do sports. They knew I could do this. Dan, I first met you when you were at the radio station,
Yeah,
right? I first met you at 760, right? So
yeah.
what is versatility to you guys? When were you told that? And along those lines, what was the best piece of advice as a young broadcaster you were ever given?
Ooh.
Versatility and best piece of advice.
All right, Jason, you want to go first? You want me to tackle this?
You go ahead first.
Uh,
I feel like I'm ordering off the Cheesecake Factory menu right now.
It's long. I tried to condense it to,
No, best piece of advice is like, do you want the egg rolls or do you want the chicken pot pie? There's a lot going on here. So you go first, Dan.
All right, versatility. I would say I was fairly versatile, only because I couldn't get the job I wanted, but I did get a job in radio, which is a minor miracle in itself because I really wasn't very good. And my boss told me that a month into my job, but I was always trying to get into sports, but the jobs were always in news. So 15 years of trying to get to sports full time was all about doing anything on the news side and then constantly volunteering. Hey, you need someone to cover this sports event, or hey, you just got the Lions rights. Would you like me to be the play-by-play guy? Yeah, sure. You've done high school football in Grand Rapids. But no, but that got me pre and post game stuff on Lions. So that to me was, but it was valuable. I think as much as I wasn't in love with morning street reporting, getting to work at 5 a.m. and going doing man on the street interviews
yeah.
at 5 in the morning. People really don't want to do man on the street interviews at 5 in the morning. They really don't.
They don't want
Waking
to
up
be on the
drunk.
street at 5 in the morning
Yeah,
if we're being
I remember
honest.
doing those.
correct.
You talk to one person, whatever the topic of the day is. Detroiters are telling me this morning, you
Mhm.
talk to one person. You're taking a literal 10-minute nap in between your 5:10 hit and your 6:40 hit. But it was good. I mean, I got to do anchoring, I got to do street reporting, I got to do a little bit of talk show with the Lions, all at WWJ. So a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It was very valuable. And you realize, and this is what I tell students, you're probably not going to get out of college or get right into a play-by-play job that is going to sustain you. I mean, you're going to have to do other things and then keep showing people that you're good at play by play or keep working on your play by play. It really, I mean, that's generally how it happens, I think. So to be versatile, to have skills in different ways, be a good writer. I think that's probably the biggest you think of, advice you got along the way. I just think of two influential people, one who helped me work on my delivery because I didn't know how to enunciate, come through the radio, project. Uh, Critical that I had to learn how to do that. I did not when I started my career. And then the next boss I had really emphasized you have to be a good writer. You have to be able to write like we talk. And that is a completely different skill than print, obviously, which was the other career path I tried to get on and didn't succeed, thankfully. And I
Exactly.
guess I mean, I always go back to those two things because if you do those two things well, then you can set yourself up for a better chance at success.
Right. Jason?
Yeah, I think the best piece of advice to me, and there have been many, but the one that set me on the most prudent but also open-minded course was I had the guy who oversaw our high school radio station, Bob Comstock, told me in a sit down to go over a script once that I shouldn't just go to school for broadcast journalism, that I should major in something else. And I
Hmm.
didn't exactly take that advice specifically because I did major in broadcast journalism, but to always want to know other things because just being a sports person isn't enough. And he
Mhm.
in terms of doing sports, like to be able to do sports well, sports is life, basically was the advice that he was giving me. And I am so grateful for it because it really opened me to want to be the curious soul that's inside of me and just investigate stuff, be interested in a bunch of different topics
Be
because
interested.
you never
Absolutely.
know when they're going to come up. But that's all to be really good advice to add to yours, Dan, while I say after that, I only wanted to do play by play. Like
That's all I wanted to do.
I had no interest in anything else. Like,
That's all I
nah,
wanted
I
to do.
didn't want to do talk radio. I didn't want to do updates. When I got the job as sports director of the college radio station, I went out of my way to make sure that I did mostly nothing other than call games. It was like a total scam that I was like, what, why doesn't Benetti do features? Oh, he's the administrative head of the station. It's taking time. And so, part of it, Judd Apatow said in an interview or one of his books, he said that he made all the movies in order to get the best time slot for stand-up now. And I totally vibe with that. All the other stuff was just to make sure that I could call games. But curiosity, even if you're not versatile in the jobs you do, curiosity has led me to, like, for a couple years, I did as a one-off the National Electricians Championships.
Shocking.
So funny, I I said going to break once in the
This is
studio.
awesome. This is awesome.
I've told you this, haven't I, Dan?
Cool.
So, okay. So I'm doing the National Electricians Championships from a studio, and my color analyst is the electrician from Bob Vila's This Old House.
Sure.
So
So he's your expert.
he's my expert. A great guy. His name's Scott Karen. Wonderful guy, huge Celtics fan. So we're sitting there, and they told us to go through the script one time, just straight up as they had written it out. They basically said, like, don't prep coming in. We'll give you all the information, and he's the expert. So you just call it like a horse race. And then, so going to break in the ad lib part of it, I was like, I was like, and then coming up after this, we'll give you the winner. It'll be electric or it'll shock you. I think I said it'll shock you.
Yeah.
And they were like, you can't say that. That'll mean it's bad craftsmanship. And I said to them, why am I here?
To
If I
read the
can't say
script.
that, why did you hire me specifically? So there was a whole discussion over what I could, and I just played it straight because I don't want the electrical people after me.
No, you do not. That
Uh-uh.
complete share. You wouldn't want that, right?
Oh my God. But I just learned something. There was say it again, electric competition. What is the exact
It's the
title?
National Electricians Championship.
I think that
It
is
was
so
in,
cool.
yeah, it was in Orlando. We did it from a studio, but
Okay, wire this house in a half an hour.
that's pretty much it. It's like you have to, like, go to the junction box and you have to do this and you have to crimp it properly and there's a technique for it.
Oh
And
my
I
gosh.
would say, like, you know, I've had some highs in my broadcasting career, and that type of event really grounds you.
Oh my God.
God,
I'm
he was just waiting to be able to drop
waiting.
that.
Bada bing,
Oh,
bada boom.
what about you, Mr. Daniels?
Me?
Yeah,
Um, well, two things.
best
The
piece of advice. I like
advice
hearing
I ever
that.
got was there's no such thing as luck. Luck is when preparation meets opportunity. You can be in the right place at the right
You
time,
need a break,
like
but you need to be
hosting the
ready for it.
electrician thing. But
Yeah,
if you haven't prepared all your life to do that and someone offers you the opportunity, you think in your head, you might be nervous. But
yeah.
yes, I can pull this off. Just like the time where you say you're not ready for something or you don't know what you're doing and you have an
Woo.
analyst do it. I was doing the Olympics in Seoul in '88, and I
Mm.
was covering road racing and velodrome. and canoe and kayaking. Learned a lot there because I started too high and had nowhere to go. I was excited at the beginning, and all of a sudden you hit the ceiling, you're hitting your head. So I learned about broadcasting there. I went back to the studio, and Bob Moyer says, "We need you in 2 hours. You have to call the judo semifinal with Canada." I said, "I know nothing about judo." He goes, "Here's a book. Take a taxi, go over there, find an analyst." And I said, "What? Find an analyst who speaks English." So I got there, reading the book, found a German guy whose country wasn't in the final. And I said, "Can you help me out?" He said, "Sure." So he did it. We're doing it. And I said, "Look, I have no idea how this match is going to end. I do know any pon is if you pin someone the proper way, it's over. So do me a favor. If you notice he pins someone in the proper way, say, 'Ken, it's over.'" So he did. Pinned him. He said, "Ken, it's over." I said, "Ippon, they win." Well, I can't remember. It wasn't Canada. I don't remember which country. So that's how I knew. I set it up with him. "You tell me when this match ends." I get back there, and Natalie Tedesco was one of our script assistants, said, "Bob Moyer came to me and said, 'Daniels, for a guy who knew nothing about judo, you sure pulled that one off.'" Yes. So it's just finding the right analyst. Or when I called tennis in '88 for the first time, and an Italian woman was playing Chris Everett, and I didn't know, I knew tennis, I played some tennis, but we weren't live. They were coming to me intermittently. It's not what you know, it's who you sit behind. And I knew to sit behind Bud Collins, who was live for NBC.
Ah,
Wrote down everything he was talking about, serve and volley, coming to the net. When they came to me, I talked everything. Bud Collins talked about this whole match. I pulled that one off. So again, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. I prepared. We're in the R&D business, Rob and do, not research and development. I knew to sit behind Bud Collins where we were situated.
Robin.
Rob and do. That's
How
what
did
it
you?
is, R&D.
Okay, so a lot to unpack there.
Yes.
A lot to unpack. Robin Do is definitely gonna be. We're gonna get you that on a piece of oak for your house.
No
I would
question.
also say, how did you find the German judo analyst?
I went in there to ask somebody and said, "Who speaks English in here and whose country wasn't in it?" They were all there watching, and he offered to do it, and there was no money involved. Just he offered to do it, and I said, "You're hired." And he came on. I can't remember his name now. I wish I did. He was such a nice gentleman and helped me out. Ippon, Ken, it's over. They win, and that was it. Canada did not win. I can't remember what country that person was, but anyway, I was so nervous at the time reading
Isn't it
about
amazing?
on the way over. But again, you're preparing best you can, but I had the confidence I could pull it off with the person who knew what they were talking about. That's
Yeah,
key.
isn't that amazing that nervousness and it just you talk about focusing. It's like you're on a wire. There's no net underneath. It's like, oh,
So let me ask you both now. So what do kids do today? We knew, and to me, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but to me, radio, and I started in radio and overnight news, was the best background possible because you learned how to ad lib. You learned how to think on your feet. And when the cart didn't play, we used to have cartridges to put in like an 8 track.
cartridges, yes.
Google that. And if it didn't play, you had to ad lib. To me, radio was the best background. So to that end, if you agree with that, and what do kids, how do they learn today? It's a podcasting world because no one's paying anymore to do overnight news. They're just running syndication now. And I feel so badly for the kids who didn't have the opportunity
Yeah,
that I had in Oshawa, Ontario, outside Toronto, then overnight in Toronto, where you could make mistakes and nobody heard you.
yeah. That's a good point. That's a good point. It really is. Because yeah, I mean, I was a DJ at my college radio station, and it was fun to try to think of clever things to say, spinning tunes on a Friday night.
Yeah.
Um,
You
I don't
went
know.
into
I
DJ
teach.
mode for a second there, and I love it. The spinning dudes on a Friday night is like, "Hey, how you doing, Johnny
I
Fever?"
was I'd go
That's
back to the
great.
door and they'd be like, "Whoa, you had a good show, to attract the young ladies," and it was very
That's right.
um, but that's a good point. I think that like I teach a short class up at Michigan State, right? Play by play
Short
called Play
people
by Play 101.
for short people,
So what's that?
for short people like me, I could attend.
Only yeah, 5'7"
You
and
must
under.
be this tall to ride this
That's
class.
right. To attend this class. Go ahead, Dan. Sorry.
No, that's all right. But I teach the radio style of play-by-play just because I know that the opportunities are going to be more streaming and television. I get that. But the point I try to make is it really makes you use your eyes. When you learn how to describe well, you have to let your eyes roam in the arena, at the field, in the stadium, whatever it is. So that you should never run out of things to say if you are really watching the game. But I do think it helps you watch the game better TV, your eyes are being pulled to the replay monitor or what's coming up next or what's in queue, whatever it might be. And sometimes, I mean, it feels like people aren't watching the game that they're broadcasting. So I do think that just teaching that style, if emphasizing really watching the game and letting your eyes roam, even if you're doing television. Um, but it is a big concern of kids are like, what do you do when you run out of things to talk about? But that gets back to your whole idea of preparation that you come in with a whole bunch of ideas that you can pivot to if the game gets out of hand or if there's a power outage or there's an injury that takes 25 minutes, right? To get off the field. You've done enough preparation that with your good analyst, you can fill the time. But you're
And in
right,
hockey,
it is a very different
yeah.
era.
And in hockey, we say when the glass breaks, you need
Yeah.
stories. Phil,
Yep.
I mean, Jason, if you're telling a kid today, is it all about the podcast world now? You can't see, go get a job in small town outside Fargo, North Dakota, and work at a radio station overnights to ply your trade. How are they learning to do what I learned in the bathroom, obviously, with my mother listening, but where we all do our own play-by-play in the basement. Jason, what do you do?
Quote, I learned in the bathroom with my mother listening.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Just great content here. I do want to know, Dan, did you use the phrase, let your eyes roam before you met me?
Oh my goodness.
And then second of all,
No, and then I say do it like Jason because he's got this unbelievable ability to focus both eyes on two different things,
yeah,
right?
it's great. It's great. It's amazing. If you could sign up for it, you'd sign up for it. So I
Podcasting,
think
by the way, I think is a phenomenal way to build your skills.
I think any version of storytelling
Hmm.
is hugely important. But I would say, as an industry, and this is like, there have been people who've given me breaks. The Tigers are one of them, right? Like people have hired me. So this is going to sound a little bit like a screed. And I would bet this will either be one of like the most played or least played portions of the podcast. But we do a terrible job as an industry of incentivizing young talent and finding young talent, new talent. Doesn't even have to be young talent, new
Right.
talent. A lot of minor league baseball teams have only one announcer. When I was starting, there were a bunch of number two positions that you could jump in, be an intern, print some stat packs, and all that stuff. It's not fiscally responsible for the team to do that, to have a second person. But to have an us and to be able to bounce stories off of people, it creates a better experience for the listener. And so part of me
Hmm.
says, what in the world are you people doing? You're in a small town. Why not put together a broadcast that is interesting for people, even if it's young people? But Major League Baseball, to me, could easily incentivize
Yes.
its minor league baseball teams to have a pipeline of the next Vin Scully. They could
Yeah.
easily do it, and they don't. And it's not, it's not. Honestly, I should call Major League Baseball and say this instead of do this on the podcast. But I'm doing it here, and I'm focus grouping you guys. Hopefully, that's cool. But I also think, you know, I do think there are a lot of executives who know exactly what a sports announcer is or can be, but I also think there are a lot of executives who just hire what they know and they just hire the wallpaper. And to me, we are competing with Hollywood. We are competing with The Voice. We are competing with all of these shows in terms of entertainment. You have to develop young talent. It is one of my big fears about the world because I care about the craft that we aren't even going to be an industry. Not that there won't be play-by-play announcers, but that there's nobody really incentivizing becoming a great storyteller. Like, who's the next Vin Scully? Would Vin even get hired in the first place? I don't know. I've had a lot of great mentors and I've had a lot of people that I've watched to help me learn how to tell stories and have some wit or whatever it might be. But like, and sometimes it's bad, but I do have fears that we are not incentivizing good new storytelling play-by-play talent. And truly, my best advice would be, how do you get into it? You sit in front of your TV every day and call a game. Like, you have to figure out what you are. You have to figure out what version you are.
Yeah.
Because the one thing you hear on like America's Got Talent, Simon Cowell will say like, "Oh, it sounds a little like a cruise ship rendition," or like, "Oh, you sound like a bad cover band,"
Right.
right? And what we are in some ways is a cover band as sports announcers, because the lyrics are the same in the game. The game is being played. We see all the movements, but we have to add our own flair, our own emotion, our own personality, but also do right by the game at the same time. And so it's like a stereo track, right? Or like a 5 track album release. It's you got the drums here and you have the guitar here. It's us and it's the game, and they're inextricably tied. But I don't think we do a good enough job incentivizing people to do this in what really is a beautiful craft. I know that's long, but like, it's important.
It was beautifully said. And when I began this and I said hockey was my symphony, what you just did there was tie that all together. It is the symphony with all the pieces. Now, they may be in our head, and the group that we all work with in television or radio or your analyst tying it in. And maybe, yes, it's the drums over here, whatever it is, the vocals over here, and you're tying it all together into what becomes a beautiful story. It's a symphony, it's a music all coming together, and you can tell when it doesn't sound right. And you are correct. We're not developing that.
Have you seen the ESPN, the first piece they put on the air when they got hockey back, the Justin Bieber narrated NHL on ESPN theme song piece?
Yes, I did.
Dan, you would have no reason to have run into it, but it's 6 minutes of pure beauty of why da da dun 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 da da dun dun means so much to people.
Yeah.
Right.
And when you watch that as a play-by-play announcer, I really do think it's one of the most elegant things ESPN has done in a long, long time.
Wow.
You
When
can you do me a favor though and intro that piece as the voice of ESPN? Please?
brought to you by Justin Bieber,
There you go. See?
that sort of thing. Um, Narrated by Biebs. So, uh, but if you listen to it and you think of the music as a play-by-play announcer, without too much hubris, we are part of the soundtrack. We're not the soundtrack. We are
Right.
part of it because the crack of the bat is part of the soundtrack and the heckler is part of the soundtrack as well.
Yeah.
But we are part of that. And I think our main goal in some regard is to, that theme doesn't speak for itself. It's an inanimate object, but it attaches itself in a positive, jarring, in the best way possible sense. And I do think that's kind of what we are as well. When people hear a recognizable voice, they say, I'm going to get blank.
100%. Yeah. That's
That's
so
good.
it was perfect. Yeah. Well said.
Brought to you
Yeah.
by the Conversation Line.
And before we wrap up the conversation line, because you both are kind enough to join us on Tuesday morning, January 14th. And tickets are available at jamiedanielsfoundation.org, and they are going quickly, Motor City Soundboard. And it is Hot Stove Stories with Mike Tirico, who I was at breakfast with you, Jason, when that day I found out Mike had the only day available was January 14th. I said, then we're doing this. And you were kind enough to make yourself available, and Len Casper, and Dan Schulman, whose son Ben, and you talk about progression. Dan Schulman, his son Ben, is doing radio for the Blue Jays, and Dan will fly out right after. I think he's got a basketball game for ESPN after. But anyway, Dan will join us. So you two, along with Len Casper and Dan, and it'll be like this, telling broadcast stories and stories behind the scene, all led by Mike Tirico. I said, Mike, you don't even have to prep for this because you know it. It's your business. And you know everybody who's involved here. So this will be easy for you. And Jason, I thank you all for being a part of that. And again, tickets at jamiedanielsfoundation.org. What you're hearing today will be a part of that, and funny stories. And Jason, I know Len Casper isn't joining us today on the conversation line, but what would Len say if he were here now, as he will be on Tuesday, January 14th, the voice of the Chicago White Sox? What would
Well,
Len
I was
Casper?
gonna say if you play your cards right and you show up at that, you'll see both Len Casper and Dan Schulman take a swing at me for doing impressions of them.
Go
My
ahead.
favorite My favorite thing about Dan Schulman is when he gets really into a game in this season, he'll say basketball. There's a little extra syllable in basketball. He says basketball. And it's like really, his voice is awesome. And I love, but if you listen for it, it's like ESPN college basketball. And it's got an extra bounce to it. So, we'll see if they both take a rip at me. But Len would say, well, it's going to be a wonderful time, and then we'll be out of here.
See, I don't even need Len to be there, but he's going to be there, and he's a Michigander, just like Tirico is, and Dan's coming in from Toronto, and you both to be here. Again, I am so looking forward to it on Tuesday
Oh, it's
morning.
gonna be fun.
What's
Yeah.
the time slot? Do we have 6 hours? Like, I
No.
feel like it's going to be.
Well, you know what? If Tirico can host the damn Olympics for NBC, he can get us through an hour and a bit, right? And with the torn Achilles tendon, which he just had surgery for, but still doing Sunday night football and everything. But anyway, he'll lead us through it. So breakfast registration is 7:30. We'll eat around 8. We'll do our thing and talk about the work we do for the Jamie Daniels
Yeah. Well,
to that substance use disorder, and then we'll have conversation. It goes 9:45, 10 o'clock. So we'll start things off around 8:20, 8:30. So we'll have a good hour 20 or so to talk, Dan. Yeah.
yeah, we're gonna be rolling along, and people are gonna be like, "Yeah, I gotta go to work. I really do. We really that's okay. Go ahead. We're
Well,
having a
It's
great
Arbor
time."
Day, guys. It's Arbor Day.
oh,
It's
is it?
been months.
Well, and when we did Mickey and the referees, and Chris Osgood and Chris Draper, and it was so wonderful. And Wes McCauley and Dan O'Halloran, we did the referees with Mick a couple of years ago. And yeah, it was supposed to end around 9:15, and by 10 o'clock, people still were asking more questions. So people will give you questions in that day, but we won't keep people much longer. But this is just a taste of what you'll hear Tuesday, January 14th. But on this day, we'll wrap this one because we got more stories to tell. We'll save them. There's a tease. We'll save them. And there's a wonderful silent auction as well, which will be up right around this time or just after the new year at jamiedanielsfoundation.org. So do bid on that. We got some fantastic items, including a visit to you, Dan, in the booth. And if Jason, we
Yeah.
can tell whether you're actually doing the game that day, so we can't promise you
Oh,
you're going to be there.
Oh,
So,
we'll
did
rope 'em in.
Biddleman tell you to say that?
oh, he did. But you may all be, well, listen, you're wanted. You're great. So you may be off doing other things. But if you're there, I'm sure you'll take the people who Ben was kind enough in the Tigers to get us, batting practice on the field, tickets to the game, experience in the booth, or your booth too. So that is all available on the auction online when it comes up. Jason, final word to you, Jason.
I just have one question for you all, and then
Okay.
wrap as you please. What one story can you tease in a couple words that people might hear if they play their cards right at this event on the 14th? What's one good story tease, because we're in the tease business, that you both can, and then I'll do one at the end.
Okay, I don't know if I can because what I'm doing in this one is I'm introing Mike Tirico, who's going to intro you guys, and I get to step away. I'm going to talk about the foundation, but I'm not teasing a story from me. No, Dan, no, and then Jason, you guys will have yours to go ahead.
Cop out.
Go ahead. Yeah, all right. So I would say if people aren't tired of hearing about the Ernie Harwell giving me my first inning of play-by-play on the last game at Tiger Stadium, it's still one of the coolest things. Whenever I tell the story, I enjoy it. If people, I think there'll still be some people who haven't heard it, but it's a remarkable story. It was a remarkable day, and it's no question it's why I'm in the booth today.
Okay, before you go, Jason, I do have it. I can tease this because Dan's not here. How Dan Schulman got his job at ESPN because Dan was working evenings at CJCL Radio. I don't even know if it was the Fan yet. I was already there working at CJCL and doing Maple Leaf Radio. And someone from ESPN was turning the radio dial from New York and accidentally happened upon Dan Schulman reading late night sports. So
Wow.
that's a tease for Dan Schulman's story. There you go.
That's
Jason.
awesome. My tease will be, if you want to hear it, I will tell you about the time that I got locked in a hotel bathroom and couldn't get out on my own.
Okay, and your mother wasn't saying you were practicing doing sports, was she?
No, no, I was like 30.
Okay, good. Then that's even better. Okay, because then I really would have worried. But that's a great tease. There you go. That's why you guys are the pros you are. You can tease, and thank you for being a part of this, the conversation line presented by Fieger Law. Thanks to you both.
Thank
All we do
you.
is win.